Hey, how's it going? My name is Alex Kulick. I am from the band Horrendous and I play bass with them.
So, first of all, congratulations, because since the release of Ontological Mysterium, Billboard has actually come out with a press release saying it's now ranked in number 4 in its category, number 5 for top new artist album, number 6 for current hard music albums, and number 15 for independent current albums. The album's only been out since August. Like, congratulations.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. I'm not entirely sure how the Billboard thing works. That may have only been true for the first week or two of the release, when things are hottest. But it got somewhere, at some point along the way, and we are all very excited about it.
Yeah. So you have been with the band since 2016. The band has been in existence since 2009, and I've actually had a chance to actually go back and listen to first album, second album, third album, and there was actually a statement put out by, again, I'm gonna quote someone else, Spin Magazine, saying that Horrendous has shown more growth in 6 years than bands 3 times as old. that again, like, that's an incredible credit to the group that you have.
Yeah, no, it's I have a kind of a privileged position in terms of this thought because I can view some of the records from as a listener, right? Because I wasn't there for some of those earlier stages, and even just within the span of records before I joined, they have moved into such expansive territory, and I think that's one of the most exciting parts of the band. That it seemed growth is kind of like a virtue.
Yeah. Well, so how did you become involved? Because the band Horrendous was a trio before you jumped in and started providing bass.
That is correct. Down to the point that they were actually playing shows without a bass player, just as a trio. It's actually a really
without a bass player.
yeah. Even though there's bass on all the records.
I was gonna say.
So this was a decision. I mean, it's a great story. I will say that. But I think Jamie, Matt, and Damien all met in college, and they became a very tight unit. And I guess they were making records together. Damien records and engineers everything himself, so everything was kind of like in-house, right? And they weren't playing a ton for a long while, actually. It was kind of like one-off shows here and there. They had never toured. And it got to a point after Anoretta came out, and that was Decibel's album of the year, if I recall correctly. And the band was picking up steam. A lot had happened. They were getting asked to play bigger shows, and they started saying, like, hey, we put a lot of effort into writing bass parts for these records. Like, it's not an afterthought. It's something that even before they had a committed bass player, it was something they really worked hard on.
Right.
And it got to the point where they're like, these bass lines and this like segment of the band sound like we need it. We have to have a bass player for these shows going forward. So they had started playing actually with a bass player, Steve Jansen, who is the guitar player from Crypt Sermon, if you're familiar with them. Another feeling absolutely fucking amazing musician, a guitar player of the craziest caliber. Early on, but he was very busy, right? Like, he already had a lot of commitments. And I met, the way that I ended up joining the band, I was working at a coffee shop in Philadelphia, on 13th and Spruce, for those who know Philadelphia well, called Toast. It no longer exists. And Matt used to come in and eat breakfast there with his girlfriend at the time.
Okay.
And he walked in one day, and he was sitting at a table in the corner, and I served him, and I noticed that he was wearing a Voivod shirt. And I just made a comment about it. I was like, hey, like, that's a great shirt. And I was also playing some Charles Mingus on the speakers, playing some jazz nonsense. And Matt commented back, like, oh, like, I'm glad you recognize the shirt. Like, I also really love the music you're playing. And we had this banter back and forth that was kind of, classic musician thing where he was like, I don't know if you're around, but I'd love to like get together and play sometime if that's something you're into. I figured I'd never hear from the guy ever again.
It's just one of those things like, yeah, I'll call you. I'll find your number in the book.
Like, this is a musician thing. Like, you have a moment of connection and you're like, it would be great to jam sometime. And like, 90% of those disappear into the ether. Now, Matt, however, hit me up right away.
Oh, wow.
And he was really diligent about getting together. He ended up coming over to my house. And he was playing guitar, and I'm also a drummer, and I was playing drums with him. Which is this whole thing. And, we had fun. It was no like big deal. We didn't like scheme to do too much in the future. We just like had a really good time. A year later, Matt asks me if I would be willing to fill in for a show at a venue called Union Transfer in Philadelphia for Decibel's Choosing Death Fest. They put out this book and did a festival in celebration of the book. And that was 7 years ago. And after that, we connected so deeply, even upon first few rehearsals, and with Steve being really, really busy and, me being excited about playing with the group, I kept playing shows with them, and it slowly moved from me being a part of the band to Horrendous being my band too.
That's awesome. That's
crazy.
Yeah. And also, that's a deep pull. Charles Mingus. I haven't heard that name in years.
Yeah, man. I'm a big fan.
Okay, so like you had control over the music of this coffee shop here. A deep jazz artist like that, Charles Mingus, like that's a very broad spectrum of musical tastes.
For sure. I was it's funny, for a long time I was actually kind of running for the hills away from playing heavy music or from playing metal, because I had done it for all of my life. I got really, really obsessed with jazz, its history, learning how to improvise better. I was really pushing. I was in school for a short time studying jazz, a very ambitious effort. Very, very short time. And, I was trying to expand my horizons a little bit. I wanted to play different things. I wanted to gain different skills. So it's just kind of put metal on the back burner. And there was some denial going on there too, right? Like, you get into something new and you start thinking like, you start trying to differentiate yourself because you don't want other people being like, oh, you're a metalhead. There's no way you'd be able to play this or that, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
All of that was very silly. And but that was when I met Matt was kind of at like the peak of me really trying to only focus on those musics. And meeting Matt and getting to learn Horrendous tunes and hang out with Matt and Jamie and a bunch of their other friends, kind of just like brought this very foundational energy back into my life. And yeah, that's the groundwork from which the band now sort of started.
That's wild. That's absolutely wild. It is kind of surprising, like, where life will sometimes just lead you. You walk away from something and it's kind of like falling in love. The moment you stop looking, all of a sudden it just comes at you like you're being hit by a bus.
100%. I've never heard anyone put it that way, like that comparison. I think that it's spot on.
Yeah.
Because I never felt like I had accomplished what I wanted to in the realm of heavy music. I played with some great outfits growing up, and I played with friends growing up, and got hired to do some touring here and there as a young person. So I already had done some things in which, like, wow, I never thought that this would be possible, but I'd never creatively on record done what I had really wanted to, because I was into a lot of metal bands that were doing some ambitious things, and I sort of never got there. And it was like, I don't know, along came Matt and Horrendous, this band that was kind of like, I don't know, like really fit the blueprint for the kind of metal that I have always really loved, and got an opportunity to work with them, and here we are.
Yeah. Speaking of creativity and that openness, as well as your band Horrendous, the band actually has this reputation of having basically an unofficial slogan of no such thing as a bad idea in the studio. Like, so like, like, can you explain the freedom and the support that happens within your group?
That's a great question. And I think that a question that gets to the heart of why I think we all work together so well, and like why the music gets to go where it gets to go. Because that freedom and support happens at every level, right? Like there's the studio is one level. That's the moment in which we have a lot of material and we're going to start hitting the tape, hitting record on the tapes, and like, starting to craft. That's a very particular stage of the creative process. But this support and openness happens from the very beginning, including, like us being in a room together, trying things out, jamming things out, making demos, dreaming big about what is and isn't possible. And like I think something we all have our differences. Right. We all have our different perspectives and strengths musically. But one thing that we all share is like kind of a complete irreverence when it comes to, limits.
Right.
And particularly like the limits of metal as a genre, and definitely the limits of death metal in particular, since that's the field that we've been, because of our history and our trajectory, that's like the genre field that we've been placed within. And everyone is just like so willing to entertain anything because we all trust each other. Like there's no one playing bullshit, there's no one playing without some kind of idea or some kind of like energy to bring to the table. So, and once we get to the studio, we've already built, an entire territory of things to use. So then it's just kind of like, that's where things get wild. I mean, being able to have a studio in-house, right? Not have to travel to a place where your time is limited and you're paying every hour or every day, means that like, whatever you can imagine for vocals, for overdubs, for synthesizers, for, extracurriculars like percussion instruments or prepared guitar, whatever you can imagine, like we have the ability to do that, and everyone's willing, like a bunch of things that happen on these records. There's like all these Easter eggs in the background that sometimes start as jokes, where like someone speaks in a weird, like haunting voice over some passage, like just to see, or like tries to sing slightly differently just to see what it would be like. And maybe we like laugh about it at first, and then we come back to it and we realize it's actually kind of fucking cool. So it's kind of like this, I think overarchingly, right? Like this willingness to experiment, and also a trust that we can experiment in a way that will actually serve the music and not just be for experimentation's sake, right? Mm-hmm. Like this kind of balance of those two things is kind of, again, a virtue of the band, 100%.
You're talking about Easter eggs. Like you have a very loyal and hardcore fan base. And when the release of Ontological Mysterium happened, like bands, or no, I should say fans, took it upon themselves to diagnose and review and even do a blind YouTube react video, which are popping up even to this day on YouTube. It's interesting how your fans will have gone into some of your songs and the albums and deconstruct like what you have created, and they'll find things and make reference to like this was here, oh, this is a reference to blah, blah, and it's wild. And it's do you find it as though it's like a compliment to you that your fans are just like they just dive in head first and absorb as much as possible?
I have less of a sense for the devoutness of the fan base. Okay. I think that's a result, of course, like when you're a creative person involved in a project, perhaps you overvalue or notice more the negative things that people have to say.
Yeah.
But I mean, over the years, I have noticed here and there, the fact that there are some people listening really deep and who are reading all of the lyrics, who are thinking about the records that have come before, who are hearing the ways that the compositions reference earlier parts of itself, like all of these technical things. I do see that that's out there, and I do see it as a compliment. I think that means that somebody thinks that the music is worthy of sort of like more than just a casual listen, right? That there's like something more there to be found, which I do believe. In fact, I feel often from some comments, some reviewer literature, things like that, that sometimes people aren't looking very deep into the songs or into the lyrics or into, the music as a whole, and not in a necessarily in a bad way, but that like being aware that there's like different levels you can get to with the music, and it just depends on how closely you're hearing. And like, we've also found it interesting the ways in which people, kind of a norm for music talk, right, is to compare, right? We only speak in terms of reference.
Yeah.
And we all find it very entertaining to see what band names or styles or like conceptual things that are coming out of, people's minds, because sometimes we think that it's apt, and other times we could not disagree anymore. There are certain comparisons and certain thoughts about the music that some of us are like, I have no idea how someone has connected these dots, because if you were to play this and then play us, I don't think they sound anything like each other. So, but that's the nature of the beast, right? With something as subjective as sonic material.
Yeah, no, it's eye of the beholder type situations where it's like it's you can write it out one way and perform it one way, and the listener is going to take it their own way.
100%. And you have to be willing to let go, right?
Yes.
Like once you've created something and kept it as your little child in house, and then it flies out of the nest, it's like a lot of stuff is out of your hands. Then you just got to let it happen.
This is true. In the topic of being your own worst critic, and on the same thread of just like, okay, that's it, it's gone, it's done. I can share a quick reference story. Corey Taylor from Slipknot will forever laugh at the song Duality, because at the very beginning, where he's speaking closely into the microphone, he says that he can hear the moment where he tapped his teeth against the mic by accident.
Yeah.
And he wanted to go back and redo it, but the studio and the band were like, no, fuck it, leave it in. So every single time he hears that song, he just smiles like, that's the one time I just and nailed the microphone.
Oh my God. I love shit like that, I have to say. 'Cause, I mean, it happens a lot more often than people think, like it's kind of terrifying how closely the makers of music, are listening into their own, like the amount of small things that perhaps many people will never hear will haunt a maker for, an eon. And and I have my own versions of that, and I think we all do. And but I also think it's part of the charm,
Like, we are our own worst critics, and that statement just rings true to this very day.
So funny.
Yeah. In regards to making references and the like, in an earlier interview, actually, your bandmate Matt Knox stated that the Ontological Mysterium is both a love letter to metal from the 80s and 90s, as well as looking forward and challenging yourselves and each other, as well as the genre as a whole. Is it often that you surprise yourself and your bandmates when recording?
Such good questions.
Fucking radio guy right here.
I know, I was gonna say, your experience, man. Like, you've done this is not your first rodeo. My God.
No. Don't get me wrong. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you, but yeah, I came prepared.
No, it's like it's always a spectrum, of like the levels of depth in terms of questions. But that's funny. That quote has been a point of contention with us to some degree, because it's been contextually utilized to make it sound like the point of the album was to be just like a worship record, right? Like copy something that exists in the past, when the full context is actually what you said, right? Is that like there are some things about metal from the 80s and 90s that we want to write a love letter to, while also sort of like pushing forward, looking into futures for ourselves and for the genre, and maybe even like critiquing some of like implicitly critiquing some of the like orthodoxies of metal as it stands right now in the present day. But to answer your question, like, we do surprise ourselves all the time. It's because I think we mostly have a goal to like make sure that all of the songs reach a certain like level of energy,
right?
And that they stay compelling, and they feel like full of, they're not boring people, and that they're full of feeling, like that's kind of like the core, almost like cliche goal of writing and making music. But when we're collaborating together so much, and having kind of this multi-stage process, right, of like writing and jamming together and improvising through stuff, and then like crafting demos and editing a lot, and then getting to the studio where all new stuff starts to come off and whole sections of songs get chopped, and maybe like new interludes start to pull up. Like, there's so much room for surprise to happen. It's almost like a guarantee just because of the way that we do it. Right. Like I feel like in other situations when you're a band that's like, okay, we have to write an album, we have to hire the studio, and we need in 3, 4, 5 days, we need to get everything done. And that's that. We can't touch anything once it's done. We're not going to be able to add anything once it's done. We don't have that restriction. So it's sort of like when you have that much room to play, surprise is kind of like, yeah, it's a guarantee. And again, that it's that room that we have, that it's a privilege that we have, I should say. And that combined with the fact that, especially, I think everyone in the band is just willing to dream big, really, and just try things out. So again, it's just kind of like comes with the territory with the way that we approach things.
Yeah. Again, you're referencing the freedom, the creativity, the support. Earlier, you mentioned like you have a studio that is in-house. Where is this? Is it behind you? Like, where is this studio?
This would be subterranean watchtowers.
Okay.
This is like I'm almost tempted to say that's where the studio is, in the subterranean watchtower, but that's wherever Damien is.
Oh.
It's had a couple of different stations. The basement of Damien's parents' house for a long time. There was an apartment in Arlington, Virginia that Damien was working at for a while. Damien just moved into a new house with his wife Erin, and I can't remember the exact town. It's in Virginia still, I think. Okay. But yeah, so I mean, Damien's setup, wherever it may be, is the sacred plane known as the subterranean watchtower. I mean, he's a very busy engineer. He works with lots of different bands. He went to school for the stuff. And so, he is our in-house studio.
That's cool. That's a handy connection to have.
Yeah. Although I will say behind me, behind my laptop currently is a bunch of musical equipment.
Okay.
And I also have a very limited setup here. And I did do some of my recording of my bass parts remotely, actually, because I'm calling in from New York, the woods of mid-state New York.
Oh, okay.
And I'm back in college at the ripe age of 30 up this way. And because of that, certain moments, I did some of the work in the studio and down with everyone, but towards the end of the recording process, needed to do a few of the songs on my own here, and then send all of the stems to Damien for crafting and mixing and all those things.
Yeah, a lot of in-house and at-home work was done, like, let's be honest, over the past 5 years due to the pandemic, and the writing, recording, producing happened over and post-pandemic for Ontological Mysterium. Once the album was released just a mere few months ago, August 2023, was it a sigh of relief for you and your band?
Oh man, I was just talking about this the other day. Big time.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't, none of us had envisioned that making the record took this long. However, I do think that the time was crucial to making the album as the way that it is now. And I think that we're all very happy with the way that it is now. But, when you work on something for that long, especially in the contemporary environment where people are churning out releases all of the time, right? Yeah. Like, it's fucking nearly impossible to keep up with all of the things that are flying out, especially, me and many, many others who are multi-genre attentive, right? So it's just like the amount of material is flying. So it's sort of like you start feeling like a thing of the past if you're not putting something out. And you also get frustrated because if you're like us, like, we are so excited about the music, we just want to share it, like that's the thing that is fulfilling to us. Like, we're not really the type of musical project that's sort of like fulfilled just by making it for ourselves, right. Like, we really want to affect people. We want people to come to the music and find something in it. So it's having it come out after this long and was, I mean, it was celebratory. It was more of a sigh of release, a sigh of relief. It was like, just like, I mean, I was intoxicated on the fact that the music was finally out and that people were hearing it and had things to say about it, good or bad. You know, it was like, I had all of the, it was almost like excited to be shit on, you know, like at least it's being heard, you know, like better than it staying in a cave and not being seen by anyone. So yeah, it was huge, and I'm still riding on it. I mean, Matt is already thinking about the next record. He has been thinking about the next record for eons. He's always doing that, and you know, I feel like I'm not sure if I'm ready.
Like, you're still coming down off of this one.
Yeah, like I just, you know, I feel like we've earned a little bit of, you know, like a lengthy celebration, but you know, everyone's also got a lot of creative bones in their body, so there's only so long that the urge can be pushed off. And I'm sure that we will probably be working. I mean, there's already material for another record floating around in the vaults. So, but yeah, for now, I am taking that sigh of celebratory relief and trying to enjoy it.
as you should, quite frankly. I mean, this album is a celebration. It's a 5 years of a lot of work, dedication, reworking, and also going through the pandemic. I mean, the fact that you've gotten the attention and the fans are tearing it apart, praising you or shitting on you is just, you know, it's everything that you could hopefully ever hope for and more.
Totally. Yeah. I'm constantly telling you know, we talk about some of the hate that flies our way here and there, and we're always saying like, this is good. You're probably, if there isn't a controversy around what you're making, you're probably not making worthwhile art.
You're not creating a conversation. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, right. It's about a dialogue, right? It would be boring if it was just a flat landscape. Like, and it keeps us on our toes too, right? Like, I think some of the critiques of Idol were operative in our writing and making of Ontological Mysterium, not in the sense of being control. You know, we did what we wanted to do, of course, but you know, listeners have something to give the conversation, meaning it has something to give the conversation to us as makers, right? So yeah, I'd say it's all great in my opinion.
On that, actually, so again, you joined the band in 2016. The band has been in existence since 2009. There was a subtle but noticeable tonal shift from the first, second, and third album, and then the fourth when you joined. And doing a little bit of looking into it, there was a little bit of pushback with some of the fans from earlier on moving forward. Now, saying that, there's also a lot of fans that jumped on at Idol and went back and came forward and are still like, you know, behind you 100%. But from your own perspective, like, what's it like being inside the club now, looking at the outside, going like, well, what do you mean you didn't? We're just doing what we do.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. I have only recently started to realize that like what the situation of our band and like the trajectory of our band sort of shows is that there isn't a single way to view an ensemble's like body of work, right? Because depending on where you enter the body of work, your perception of all of the rest of the things are going to be different. And there were some people who were there when Sweet Blasphemies and the Chills came out, right? And there were people who were there being like in the, you know, early 2000s or mid 2000s being like, this is an amazing homage to old school death metal, you know, like, and this is what we want to see this band do. Like HM2 pedals all day. Like we want buzzsaw guitar tones and like, you know, boneheaded moshy riffs forever, right? Like
and throat tearing, bleeding lyrics.
Totally. Like, you know, horror, zombie, you know, horror adjacent or like, like all of those different things, right? And of course, like if you were there for that moment and that's something you really adore, and then you see even just the jump from the Chills to Ectasis, right? And which like some of those things, like still HM2 tone, still has like this like a sonic aesthetic quality that is maybe recognizable to old school death metal fans, but starting to push off into other directions. Like melody was a lot bigger. There were these like almost like rock anthemic moments all over Ectasis that were not necessarily forwarded on the Chills. So like all this to say, it's really interesting to see the way that people's perceptions sort of like ebb and flow, or like are stuck in one place, or really committed to, and the opposite is true, right? Where like some people are really, really into the most recent material, but would never ever really spend much time with a record like the Chills. And it's a dynamic thing. And from my perspective, which I do think is sort of like a unique one in terms of the band members, right? I just see the band kind of embodying something that is kind of like, I think, a normal virtue for musicians who are doing things for a long period, who are committed to continuing to do it, which is once you've done something, you move on. Like, if we've been putting out the Chills 2, 3, and 4 this whole time, everyone would be telling us to go fuck off. Like, or who knows? Maybe we'd be the biggest band in the world, because old school death metal is like one of the most popular things like in the metal world right now. So like,
but that's not where you guys are. You guys are expanding and moving forward and challenging yourselves creatively, as stated before.
Exactly. And like, it's not because we don't love that stuff. It isn't like a full sale rejection of anything that's come before. It's just that, like, if we're going to be taking our time, making a record is a fucking it's an expedition, sometimes through hell.
Yes.
And if we're going to push ourselves through that hell, we're going to do it for something, that for us at least is novel. Not necessarily saying that we're capable of doing something that is like for the world completely novel, like something entirely new, but just like that for us feels like a new adventure, like right. It's just what keeps it exciting and exhilarating for us, and pushes us and helps us learn things, and makes us feel like continuing to make records is contributing something, as opposed to just like, when you're in the music business proper and you're on contract for records and all these different things, it's hard actually not to just be like, well, we're just going to churn out material. Right. Like, we're just going to make another record along these lines because we know we can. We've done it before. We have a blueprint, et cetera, right? Right. And that's just not something we've ever wanted to do. Like, we want to put out records that we're creatively proud of, and in order to do that, we got to push back. We got to push through in the through the thing that we've already done, and we got to try to go further. And it's annoying, quite frankly, because it's not easy. Yeah. But it makes us feel like it's worth it at the end after we've done a lot of trudging through the mud.
Fair enough. So Ontological Mysterium hasn't even stopped spinning yet, and there's already conversation of a new album and going back in the studio and possibly giving birth to that iron lead stone that is just both agony and rewarding, but at the same time it's something that you're passionate about. It's not very often that people get a peek behind the scenes when it comes to songs that potentially have been on the shelf for a while and it's just been reworked. We all have the perception of being a fan of music that every single track is like that's all brand new. This was all written within like the last week. Are there songs out there, if you don't mind allowing us to peek behind the curtain, are there songs out there that's sat on the shelf for a while or are still sitting on the shelf that maybe might get a workover?
100%.
Really?
Yes. Such a good question. I mean, a low-hanging fruit example is actually Preterition Hymn from
really?
The opening riff to Preterition Hymn is a riff that Damien wrote like an eon ago. Like, I'm talking like maybe, I can't remember the exact era, but Ectasis and Areta sessions, like long ago. That was like a catchy riff, but that the band felt had never fully blossomed into its full self, right? Like it never turned into a song that felt like it would fit on the records that they were working on at the time.
Right.
So this is something. It's funny, that song wasn't even originally slated to be on the record. Really, I want you to picture me sitting in the woods of New York in the midst of my fall semester, my first year having returned to college, and I am working on my bass parts for songs that already exist. And at this point, Matt and Jamie were still going down to work with Damien in the studio and finish odds and ends and make sure that things are getting wrapped up. Right. And I get this file in my email that's titled Little Death. Okay. And I knew what that was because Little Death, you know, this musicians will know before you get to album stage.
Yeah.
You make these demos. Maybe sometimes they're shitty recordings on your phone, and you give them these stupid titles that have no bearing on anything.
Yeah.
They're just, and I remember that during the ontological writing sessions, or the first couple of years of that we had messed around with this riff that Damien had brought back to life from an earlier era. And I got a file in my email of this song completely written and recorded, completely recomposed in a new context with a beautiful acoustic outro that I had never even heard. This is something that they just decided to give a shot because they had extra time in the studio. And they were like, we have a surprise for you. Here's a song that you need to add to your list of things. And I was like, what's happening? Like, is this going on the record? And of course, like, sure enough, like I listened to it and I was like, this is great. Like, this is awesome. And I see where this fits on the record. I can't believe that this is happening. And so, you know, I could give you many other examples, but it's not a linear trajectory ever. Right. It's always like, for a band that is sort of like writing material in the background so frequently and consistently, there's always stuff that stays on the shelf. And there's always stuff that is actually super new that didn't make the cut for this record.
Yeah.
And there's one song in particular that I'm thinking of. I actually asked Matt the other day. I was like, "Hey, are we ever gonna bring this song back?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, next record."
So it's on the way.
It's on the homework list. So you know, like this is kind of like a, you know, that is a look into the fact that, you know, that's the scale with which we're working all the time. So it's crazy. That's awesome.
These are my favorite things of talking to a musician and an artist. Is like you get like the peek behind the curtain of stuff that we just don't even consider. Like there's so many stories out there of like artists, musicians, bands like didn't even consider that song, or that song was actually borrowed from somewhere else, or blah 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 blah. And like again, like just being a music fan, you get an album without any sort of context, like all this stuff is new. This was all just like a one brainstorm, 1 hour in the studio, boom, done. Like
all an illusion.
No, yeah, exactly. There is no knob on the desk of a studio that says Studio Magic, but you know, they don't know that.
Yeah, 100%. And that's true on so many levels. You have no idea.
So a couple of questions for you from some fans also off of Patreon. And cool. If you don't mind, we'll
Not
get
at
into
all.
these.
I'm thrilled.
Okay, cool. So Dan asks, your artwork is utterly amazing for every single album. I love it. Who does the art for your album covers?
That is Brian Smith. He is an amazing painter, and we have the very privileged honor of being the only band that I believe he has worked with making album art. You know, he's very committed to his own creative sort of flows, and you know, he doesn't, you know, I think working with another person, having expectations put on him is something that is not all that appealing. And for some reason he agreed to work with us, and ever since, you know, Ectasis was the first record that he made an album cover for us on, and since then, you know, like that was such, I think the band felt like that painted such a complimentary picture of that album and sort of the aesthetic of the band that it was hard to let go. And then, you know, he did Anaretta. And then actually for Idol and Ontological Mysterium, we chose paintings from his like current sort of like vault of paintings that had not been used or bought. And so we actually instead of him like crafting an album cover based on ideas or the songs or all these things, we actually worked with him and chose one that we felt would work. Because we just wanted to continue working with him, and he does have a busy schedule, and like just there's all kinds of variables in terms of whether someone can like creatively craft for you every detail. So, but yeah, that's Brian Smith. He's one of a kind, and we're thankful to him.
Awesome. Angela off of social media asks, will you ever do a Canadian tour? I know being an American band, it can be a little bit difficult crossing the border, but I would love to see you in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
We've played Edmonton before.
Oh, shit.
Believe it or not. And it's so funny. And I really appreciate this question. And it's one of those cosmic things where Jamie sent me a text the other night, and he was like, randomly, completely unprompted, he was like, I was just thinking about us playing Edmonton. Take a look at where that is on a map. This is like, must have been like midnight or something. Like, this was on the Decibel tour. We toured with Creator, Obituary, and Midnight, and we opened the package that year. And we played Calgary, we played Edmonton, we played, what is the city in British Columbia on Vancouver?
Vancouver, yeah.
Is that British Columbia? My geography is
terrible. No, you're on it, yeah.
So yeah, and like didn't.
I'm from Vancouver.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
I love British Columbia, man. I wish I could. I actually have a close friend who lives out there, and I want to visit him someday. But yeah, so it's not outside of the realm of. If we've been to Edmonton once, we can go to Edmonton again. I've loved playing in Canada when we're there. I always feel like it's its own experience, and touring is tough for us these days just because of the life circumstances of everyone. Damien just had a child.
Wow.
I don't know if that's out there in the media or not, but I'm blowing your cover, D. He is now Daddy Damien.
Oh, cool.
And, Matt's a school teacher. Jamie is an immunologist who works in a lab. He's a postdoc, or he may even be beyond postdoc now, and I'm back in school in New York. So you can imagine getting these things to work can be tough, but we have an eye to making sure that Ontological Mysterium gets its due. We are going to be playing some shows later this year. Not crossing any borders yet, but a lot is yet to be seen. There's a lot of changes going on in terms of like bureaucracy within the band. So I think that there's always the possibility, and I hope that we can make it there.
Gotcha. Cool. That's all you could really hope for, right?
Yeah.
Life does get in the way of a lot of things. So
it does. Yeah. I wish I could be touring 300 days out of the year, honestly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Off of Patreon, Alita asks, what is your concert pregame routine?
I would say this depends on what kind of show I'm attending.
Okay.
Now, and this also, I actually took this as a consumer or as a player, like my pre-show routine, like when we play shows or when we go.
Let's hit them both. Might as well, right?
That's fine.
Yeah, because the question is open-ended on that end. So
yeah. I am a pretty casual music goer when I'm by myself. Even being up in the woods of New York, I there isn't a whole lot of like pre-gaming or planning that, like there's small venues and musicians who are coming through town who I want to check out. And I often try to go to the venues that I like up here and just try to hang out a little bit beforehand, see the people I know, shoot the shit.
Right.
But I also see a lot of shows with my bandmates. Right. And when you see a show with Matt Knox, Jamie Knox, Nick Duchemin, who is the singer of The Silver, a band that I also play guitar in, it's a ritual. It is a major preparation. We are hanging out beforehand. We're spinning records, usually drinking, maybe trying to find a way to get a good solid dinner because all of us know that we're probably not going to eat beyond a certain point.
Yeah.
And that really feels like, that's like the gathering of the fucking rascals. Like that's it really is like when I'm with them, it's a to-do for sure. But otherwise it's pretty boring. And for the band, honestly, I think we usually try to make sure that we spend a little bit of time together before the shows. We don't always warm up, but all of us really like to, because it does really help. And I feel like we all, at least for me, I always try to have one stiff drink.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I've been playing music since I was a young kid. I've played more shows than I could possibly count, and I still get nervous as fuck every time. And especially playing horrendous tunes, man. Like, it's not easy music all the time.
No.
And I'm like holding on for dear life every show. And it's crazy that that's the case. You think I'd get used to it, but when you're performing really hard and you're like excited, which I am when I'm playing, you can't be fully controlled all the time.
Right.
You know, and your hands get tired and all these different things. So just one stiff drink before the show sometimes keeps it so that my anxiety just is in check.
Just to compare, or at least relate, like, I've been in the radio industry for 20 years, and before each and every show, I am nervous every single time. If I'm not nervous, I'm gonna have a shit show, because I'm not on my game. I'm not on my edge. I'm not fully aware, right? I'm distracted or just not feeling well, whatever. But no, like 20 years later, I am still like, before chatting with you, I was nervous. I was like probably even over preparing. So like that.
Totally.
I get it. And it's healthy. It's good. Just as long as it doesn't
embrace it. It's a sign that you care.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
like, this isn't bullshit to you. This
exactly.
is something that every moment counts.
Exactly.
Good thing.
Michael asks, what's the weirdest road story so far? Oh shit. What did I just step in?
Oh God. The weirdest road story. That's tough. It's a tough one. It's also particularly tough because I am notorious for having a terrible memory.
Oh, okay.
It's very funny. Like, tours, my memory of tour, like, totally slips by. But here's what I'll do. I'll get a little bit. I'm gonna get the slightest bit personal here.
Fine.
And I will share my own weirdest tour story, which happened on this most recent southwestern tour that we did in support of the record.
Okay.
Which is, and I'll try to make it brief. But I on the trip, I was recently single.
Okay.
After a long relationship.
Fine.
And I fired up ye old dating apps. And tried to see if I could get myself into some responsible and fun trouble on the road.
Yeah, as any adult should.
Which I had never done. Like, tour is always for me, like, I take it, like, there isn't a whole lot of extra time for things, like, it's not the kind of, like, party bus you think tour is. It's a lot of fucking work with very little time.
Right.
But we just gave it, Matt and I both, I'm sorry, I'm outing you too, Matt, but Matt and I gave this a shot as just a sort of an exercise. Like, we've never done this. We're both in a position to do it. Let's see how it goes.
Right.
And very little, I mean, as you can imagine, very little happens because it's just impossible to, to be made available when you're touring. But I did get invited to go night kayaking in Tempe, Arizona by a stranger. And I'm not going to go into details, but it was completely platonic hang.
Okay.
But this person was one of the strangest human beings I ever met. I was very uncomfortable the entire time. I got driven out into the absolute batshit wilderness of Arizona to an artificial lake in the dead of night and kayaked on a lake with no flashlights, which is extremely dangerous, with a person who, quite frankly, I didn't really get along with all that well. And I went on this journey, and I thought maybe I was going to get kidnapped or killed. But actually, it just turns out it's just a fairly oddball who really likes taking strangers on adventurous night kayaks. And I made it home safe. Nothing happened whatsoever. And I just got, in the moment that I was able to relax from how weird this situation was, I got to go on a beautiful kayaking adventure in the middle of the night in Tempe, Arizona.
An experience you'll never forget, and also kidneys and livers all still attached.
All intact. I mean, and I will tell you this, because we don't have time, the amount of the weirdness of this trip, I can't even explain to you. Like, just trust the sound of my voice that it was one of the strangest experiences of my life.
I think that'll stick with, that'll haunt my nightmares for
I hope that I really hope that answers the question. There are probably much better stories to tell, but that's just the one that came to mind.
No, that's a good one. That's an absolute banger right there. Final question. This is from me, and this is something I like to ask my guests: is what is one thing that your fans, the audience, the world doesn't know about you simply because they haven't asked?
Oh man, I think there's probably quite a bit. We covered one earlier in the fact that I think this is probably on the table just because of conversations about the band. That I'm quite a big fan of jazz and improvisation, and I listen to a lot of really, really weird music.
Right.
But that's kind of a low-hanging fruit. I would say something that is way harder for people to know is that I am a big poetry nerd. I have been super, super attentive to poetry, poetics, and writing since I was young. It's currently a big part of what I am back in school for right now. I kind of see poetics as an experimental way of doing research as opposed to just like an expressive way of writing. So I'm really interested in language. My shelf behind me is composed probably 60 to 70% of poetry. I'm a book collector. I like to collect books from independent presses long dead, particularly from the United States in mid-century. So I'm a bit of a nerd, I think is really what this is all pointing towards. And I've been trying to be better about being not embarrassed about being really, really into poetry. So you gave me the opportunity to admit it. So there you go.
I appreciate. I feel closer to you already.
I'm also a huge video game nerd.
Oh yeah, you were admiring that earlier.
I'm sorry, the background is so good.
Yeah.
The second I got on the call, I was like, oh.
Yeah. Now, just to give you, so like NES, SNES, N64.
N64.
Yeah. Back here, the computer is blocking it, but PlayStation 2, Xbox Original, Xbox 360. There's a shelf up there. It's Dreamcast and Sega CD, PlayStation 1. Like, I've been collecting this for years.
Do you have the Sonic Adventure Battle Dreamcast?
No, God, it's on the wish list.
I know it's a hard one to get.
Yeah,
but it probably goes to show that I knew I could tell what all of those games were on your shelf. That's how much. So like, I'm with you.
Right on. All right. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. Again, congratulations on Ontological Mysterium. The release is fantastic. As I stated earlier off the record, it was my cardio anthem, the entire album from start to finish earlier today. Good. I love it. It's absolutely an incredible album. And please let me know and let everyone else know like what is next with Horrendous.
So we are. First of all, thank you for having me. It's been great to chat, and it's great to hear your thoughts and other people's thoughts. You filtered all of them through, which is amazing. And in terms of what's next, we have some shows that we're going to be announcing soon. We're trying to, despite everyone's busy schedule and the complications of life, we're trying to build little spaces to give Ontological Mysterium its due. And bring some of the songs out live and make sure that we're playing at a time where people seem excited about the music. So that'll be coming soon. It's going to be a couple of months still, but they're coming. And then we're also working on trying to find other bigger opportunities to play out. Maybe even trying to get across the pond over next summer. We've never done we've played one show in Europe and that's it. So that's something that's on our minds. And outside of that, we're waiting for the moment in which we all start hitting the grind again. Again, like I said, I'm not fully ready personally, and I really hope that we can focus on playing some really good shows because I think the album deserves it, right? So that's mostly it. I think I'm trying to make sure that the record gets some life out there and that we can bring it to life. And other than that, pushing forward creatively on to the next one.
You guys are on Bandcamp. You're also on Spotify. You're a part of Season of Mist. Yep. And Horrendous Band is essentially where they can find you on social media. I know that there is at very least a topic that's already been created on YouTube, but there is an Instagram account.
Yeah, it's a horrendous_official.
Official. Right on.
And other social. We do still have a Facebook, but how that is going in terms of. We try to keep it up to date because we know that some people are still on there. Yeah. But mostly Instagram and Facebook as of now.
Gosh, perfect. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for making it to the end of this episode. And if you don't mind, whatever it is that you are enjoying this episode on, be it on YouTube, the video form, or wherever you're listening to this, just please give me a follow. That way you can keep up to date with new episodes as well. It shows me that you are listening and you want more content. And also, it helps me out a lot. So if you don't mind, follow, subscribe, whatever it is that it is possible on this platform of your choosing. And if you want to support me further, TheMediajack.ca. There is Patreon. There is also other episodes and how to enjoy those. And there's a merch store. And of course, if you join me on Patreon, you can actually get a shout out and be invited to ask questions to future guests or get a credit just like our executive producer yet again, Red Wolf Don. Again, TheMediajack.ca is where you can go for all of that and more. Thanks for joining me. Take care.